Good evening. Yes, this is Soni Irabor, and the program, of course, is Soni Irabor Live, SIL. Yesterday was February 6th, and that was the day we all celebrated Professor Patrick Utomi, alias Pat Utomi. And since that yesterday, we've been in a celebratory mood. He's been in a boozer, but finally he came to Lagos today, and I was happy about that. But we couldn't get him to the studio, so straight to the airport, from the airport to the house, and then Zoom, and here we are. So please help me welcome Professor Pat Utomi, a 70-year-old on the 7th floor. You're welcome to the program. Okay, and so while we are doing that, yes, say that again, please.
Thank you so very much. Such a pleasure to be able to
just to let the world know that we have 2 telephone lines for anybody who wants to phone in, because on YouTube, on Facebook rather, many people said they wanted to be able to get through to the program. And Godwin Dimoriako, who's the producer, has already promised that he will put those lines on. By the way, how does it feel to be 70?
Well, actually, no different than it felt to be 69.
I like that's the mathematics of professorship. Okay. Well, we're talking about leadership today and the Nigerian crisis. Jokes apart, it's no longer a joke. And even just a few days ago, hundreds of Nigerians were killed in Kwara State, and we don't know where next. They seem to be just getting everywhere. Now, that's about insecurity. But the Nigerian nation has had 38 years of military rule, and then about 30 years or less than 30 years of civilian rule, as it were. We're about 30 years. So if you look at all of these together, you've been in government briefly, and you've also been in corporate endeavor, and then you are in training. You are in centers of excellence. So how do you really look at the Nigeria that we all had hoped would be the greatest?
You know, there are days you wake up and you feel really very sad. And there are other days you wake up and you say to yourself, why was I born? If I was born, it is to make a difference, to be part of getting things done right. So you stop moving in the direction of despair. You start going in the direction of, this can be turned around. This can become lessons learned. One of the things that I have managed to learn, one of the speakers at the Enugu Symposium was James Robinson, who won the 2024 Nobel Prize in Economics. And James makes a point about the role that institutions play in economic performance and development generally. And then lately, he's actually writing a book on human values and development. So I am welcoming him to my club in the values and human performance territory. Really, really, truly, Nigeria has underperformed because the Nigerian elite have not consciously stayed on the track of institution building. If you look at broad spectrum of our national life, you see how our institutions have been failing us. 2 major institutions that have failed us remarkably in recent times: the judiciary, the Electoral Commission. And you will see from all contemporary writings on development the pride of place that goes to institutions and how societies have grown. Clearly, of course, there's a lot of research and work that has produced Nobel Prizes around the role that healthcare and education have played in development. Angus Deaton at Princeton wrote the book, The Great Escape. health, wealth, and the origins of inequality. And you look consistently and you see that amongst the things that our leadership elites have done is taking their eyes off the things that have made others develop, taking their eyes off education. In 1960, a British educator called Eric Ashby, Sir Eric Ashby, was appointed by Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa to head the Commission on Higher Education in Nigeria and review it. And one of the things Eric Ashby said was that the quality of higher education in Nigeria in 1960 was as good as the very best in the world. Today, not even the kamikaze would dare say such a thing. Very sadly, even though there is light, and this is where I draw my strength from, we say quality of higher education in Nigeria is now a bit of a source of notoriety. And yet, within 25 years, the work that a few of us with no resources whatsoever have done at the Lagos Business School led to global ranking from Financial Times, from economists, placing the Lagos Business School in the top 50. So it is possible. Nigeria can do things. Just like when you look at the Nigerian diaspora and you look at how they contend, you go to the United States, 70% of all the black doctors in the United States of America are Nigerian. One of them is going to walk into my house in the next 15 minutes or so. He's come with a group of other doctors who have been responsible for looking after me during challenging health times. And you marvel, it is these same Nigerians. Surely there's something to say that weak institutions are the things that make us underperform. So I speak with a sense of hope that we can turn things around. And part of that hope is the diaspora that we've sprouted out of frustration. You may recall that some years ago, I think about 2015, I don't remember exactly, I actually wrote a piece titled The Generation That Left Town. This came out of a conference on education at the Lagos Business School. I was invited to give the keynote, and I referred to Sir Eric Ashby and the quality of higher education in Nigeria in the 1960s. And a Gen Z person there, understandably, just gets upset and says, you guys have come again. Every time we say, look, education is not as it used to be in Nigeria, we ask ourselves, if it was that good, if that education was that good as you guys say, how come those of you who got that education have made such a mess of the country?
Okay.
And I was very cool and calm. And I said to her, from your perspective in perception, maybe you are right. But have you ever given thought that those who got that education in Nigeria have never run Nigeria? What actually happened to Nigeria was before that class who came out of UI, UNN in the 60s, in the 50s and co, before they could get into leadership position, a coup d'etat took place in 1966, beginning of 1966. That emerging leadership elite at first turned to knowledge and sources of knowledge to guide it. Then hubris took hold. And before you knew it, we were in a mess. And we have continued to be in that mess.
Okay.
So don't say those who got that education did not run Nigeria well, because they never got a chance to run Nigeria.
Okay. We'll take a short break at this stage. And we'll go from education to health and power and all of that, just to look at Nigeria and what is wrong with it. But we'll be right back after the break. This is Soni Irabor Live, and we are on to Professor Utomi, who celebrated 70 years on February 6th. That was yesterday. Well, you see, for a man like Professor Pat Utomi, I'm used to calling him doctor all the time, but he's professor many years and many times over. For a man like him, you know, for a man like Pat Utomi, you will see that he has seen Nigeria from in his 20s to the 30s. Then he started teaching in the 40s and so on and so forth. Let's look at education you talked about. Health is another issue. Power that has never been able to carry Nigeria. We're talking about 230 million people. And yet there is not enough electricity to power even 50 million of such people. So what is happening to Nigeria? Is there a lack of political will, or what is it?
It's a collapse of culture. My brother Soni, these concepts need to be internalized deeply so that understanding can come. Because many of the people who do this damage don't actually know enough to understand the depth of the damage that they do. Look, when Nigeria entered self-government, there was a rush to development. And a lot of things were achieved phenomenally, whether it was in manufacturing, the healthcare system developing. If you went to University College Hospital in Ibadan in the early 60s, you knew you were in one of the best hospitals in the world. There was no question. You didn't have to. I had the privilege as a student in Lula College, Ibadan, in the 60s, of actually spending my holidays in UCH, because a cousin of mine and her husband were on the staff of UCH. Just the environment to live in, where their staff lived in, was, you know, it was like you lived in Europe. The quality of service in the place. Saudi princes used to come for treatment in Ibadan. And a particular story, I think it was a chief pilot to the late President Yaradua, who was walking down the corridors of the Saudi German hospital where President Yaradua was receiving treatment in Saudi Arabia. And the owner of the hospital, founder of the hospital, said to him, you must be one of those in the delegation of the Nigerian president. He said, yes. And he said to him, you know, it's painful to me, even though I'm glad for us to be providing you this service, but it's painful to me because when I was a very young man, I had a very bad heart condition, and I needed to get healthcare from the best place I could find it in the world. And I was given options. In the Commonwealth, amongst the 2 or 3 best hospitals was, of course, in London, the University College Hospital there, I guess one in Australia, and one in Nigeria, in Ibadan. And I said to myself, well, that place will be warmer than London or the other place. And more importantly, I might even see some Muslims there. I'm likely to see some Muslims there. So he made the choice to come to Ibadan. And he got the life-saving treatment in Ibadan, and was motivated by that to start in Saudi Arabia, work on a hospital that could compare with UCH. And then years later, still in his lifetime, the president of that country comes to receive treatment in his hospital. He found that that was a very beautiful thing. And literally many spheres of Nigerian life, that is the story. So how did we get there? Look, progress is about discipline. There has been a collapse of discipline in Nigeria. There's this, you know, rascality that if you can get as much money as possible, you were okay. No, money doesn't make you okay. And so we lack the discipline to do the things that make for sustained progress. In healthcare, I mean, look at the stories that have come. I mean, I just wept when I heard the story of Chimamanda. I broke down literally when I heard the story of the snake bite in Abuja. I was completely shattered when a couple of other cases were pointed to me. And these are basic routines. Doctors from the US visiting Nigeria, and the simplest of things happens to them and they didn't make it. Their colleagues are so upset at these things. So why should this be the case for something that has been taken for granted in most healthcare systems in the world, for a country that people came to for medical tourism in the 60s? Well, look, first, the sense of fairness and value with first soldiers and politicians appropriating resources to themselves outside of their contribution. I say outside because I like to give an example. The late Professor Elebute used to tell us that the day he was appointed a professor of medicine at the University of Lagos, his salary immediately exceeded that of the Prime Minister of Nigeria. And it makes sense. A man who spends so many years training to be a doctor, to then become a professor of medicine and all of that, should not earn the same thing as some charlatan who is in the Senate. But we have managed to reverse things such that the PA to that charlatan in the Senate earns several times what the professor of medicine earns. So what do you expect to happen? That professor of medicine decides to go off to greener pastures. First, it was to Saudi Arabia back in the 90s or whatever. I recall writing a case study on Glaxo, I believe it was, and SmithKline Beecham. They were trying to do drug tests. And normally, of course, the partners for those drug tests are academic medical people. And they were working with professors in Ibadan to test these medicines. They started with one set. After a few months, all of them had moved to Saudi Arabia. They ended up with another set. After a few months, everybody was going to Saudi Arabia. After a while, they gave up. And so even pharmaceuticals began to collapse in Nigeria, no clinical tests in Nigeria, and so on and so forth. Just this sense of not being proportional in terms of compensation.
If I may interject there, Professor.
Yes.
The issue of the rule of law begins to rear its head in my mind. I will give people a chance. I mean, the producer will put the numbers on the screen, and then they can call from any part of the world, because people need to ask you questions. And my question in this instance, for me to you, is what is the National Assembly doing? If all those opportunities, suddenly we have become, like Ukpabi Asika used to say, X has been. That's not what we should be talking about at this time of our lives. And I do not blame the Gen Z woman or girl that said, look, don't say this because education is neither here nor there for us. What is wrong? Well, in the meantime, let me quickly say that you are free to call us. The number will be placed on the screen, and then you can call us from anywhere you are, and we will take your call, because Professor Utomi is here to give you answers. An elder statesman, you call him. Well, if you remember my question.
Yeah, well, you were talking about, Gen Zs and everybody free to ask how we got here.
Yeah.
So how did we really get here?
And I also mentioned the National Assembly, by the way, National Assembly.
National Assembly is a critical part of it. Abuse is something most people want to do when they have power. What prevents them from it is the way civil society stops them. This push and pull between civil society and power, and the general inclination of power to abuse, leads us to a situation where boundaries begin to appear. Now, it is those boundaries that we call institutions, and people know that they should not go beyond certain boundaries. What happened in Nigeria, very honestly, was that a few people who should not be in politics took over, especially in 1999. Most people thought that the traditional politicians that came from the Awolowo generation, that followed people like them, like Zig, like Okpara, would come into public office in 1999 and continue. with traditions of public service, where service is sacrificial giving of oneself for the advance of the common good. That greater good actually creates an atmosphere in which you can get more for yourself. But many of those politicians did not trust the military and did not trust that the military was going away. So they stayed back and all kinds moved into the arena. And once they moved in, Nigeria was done because they began to call themselves all kinds of names, Sheikh, this, that. And they took from the treasury and used that to create barriers of entry for those older politicians who could have come back in when it looked that the military had actually gone. And with that, they began to abuse, and the system failed to check their abuse. So we couldn't build institutions to stop them. I mean, first there was push and pull under Obasanjo. They were, Obasanjo called them legislators, and all kinds of things happened. But somewhere along the line, everything just like a dam in a big flood collapsed. And these guys went totally ballistic, pocketed the treasury, paid unreasonable amounts of monies to themselves. But I tell you, these things are not sustainable. They can get away with it for a season. Somebody said to me yesterday, said, "Do you remember Samuel Doe?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Many people in National Assembly will go the way Samuel Doe went." And I felt a little sad because while I would like to see correction take place in Nigeria, I don't want us to begin to go back into history where our National Assembly members and people in the executive branch are being slaughtered on the streets of our country and all of that. But you see, when you make peaceful change difficult, you make violent change inevitable. My prayer is that they get reasonable and come back from the brink where they have reached. So we can build a society that is focused on tomorrow for our children, not on the rapacious narcissism that has grabbed this particular group of politicians who have made the National Assembly lose the essentials of the agency function, that is, people who represent the people and work in their interest. It's clear that the National Assembly doesn't work in the interest of the people,
but
in the interest of those guys.
Yeah, but the level of impunity, it makes nonsense of the respect for the rule of law. You see, I've always asked so many questions. Who is above the law anywhere in the world, talk less of Nigeria? I don't think there's anybody above the law. So why will we get to that level where impunity has now taken over?
Because our institutions are weak. And I tell you what happens when you have weak institutions. Back in the 60s, a certain economist from out of Harvard called Klitgard wrote a book after doing World Bank consulting in Africa. He called them tropical gangsters. He opens with Equatorial Guinea. And some of us, when we were younger students, used to say, that can never happen in Nigeria. But it's now worse in Nigeria than what Klitgard wrote about when he wrote about tropical gangsters. They have no dignity at all anymore. They're just like bandits on the streets. These people who are in the National Assembly, in the executive branch. Can the country survive it? It is possible. Again, I'm in danger of running off with my Malaysian examples and so on and so forth. But those countries were going in that direction until leadership emerged. And part of what Mahatma Mohammed did, in emerging, he said, look, first of all, we must unite. We cannot have people so divided such that most people are outside the house pissing into the house, rather than everybody being inside the house pissing out so that the house does not smell. This mantra taken from Lyndon Baines Johnson shaped how the Malaysian elite got reconstructed. And looking at their neighbors across the Straits of Malacca, Singapore, and a new flying geese phenomenon that literally led to Southeast Asia's miracle economies syndrome emerged. I am convinced, I don't know if it's just a matter of my faith, that we'll get rid of these characters who currently are making a mess of Nigeria. It will happen one way or the other, by fire or by force.
Okay.
And when they get out of the scene, we will get patriots who will think more of their children, think more of the common good, and think more of the fact that together we can do exploits. And bring the elite together the way Mahathir brought them in when his new economic policy was launched, and then Vision 2020, as it was, then took off. And I think that will be the rescue of Nigeria. I'm somehow convinced about this. Maybe I'm daydreaming, but I'm convinced that will happen.
We'll take another short break.
It's a shame over the blood of these characters who are making a mess of this today.
Okay, so we'll take another short break, and right now, when we get back, we'll take some calls and then go seriously what the solution should be. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back. Yes, Soni Irabor live, and calls are available. The numbers will be displayed, 808-821-1723. If you are calling from outside Nigeria, it's +234. So feel free to call us, and then we'll take your call. We just have about 10 or 11 minutes left, and I want you to take advantage of that. But Professor Pat Utomi, you have seen Nigeria, you've seen rulers of Nigeria, you've interacted with the rulers of Nigeria, and you've also interacted with the corporate world. You've interacted with the training institutions of Nigeria. We have the best brains around the world, scattered around the world. You mentioned Chimamanda Adichie, who came to Nigeria and lost a son. How sad it was. We have so many others. Philip Ebeagwali is one of them, with the internet and all of that. There's so many names we can mention. What is wrong with Nigeria? Is it that there are people who are saying PhD, which is pulling down in Nigeria, has become the essence of our thinking faculty, or what?
No, Sonny, the time is too short to give you the depth of analysis. Like I made the point, when James Robinson made his remarks at our Enugu program 2 days ago, or 3 days ago, he went back to a great Nigerian called Peter Eke. Peter Eke in 1975 wrote a famous piece, generally referred to as the two publics, about looking at colonialism and how culture in Nigeria got split into primordial culture and essentially civic culture. Again, a lot of academic jargon here, for those not familiar with the territory. What the basic argument is that one of the things that colonialism did to us is that whereas if you look at Western culture, they have one culture, civic culture, which the values you use in your home are the same values you use outside and in your behavior towards the state and so on and so forth. But with colonialism, it split the consciousness of the average African such that the same man who will not steal from his village association purse will go to the Ministry of Finance and clear the treasury. And his relatives will even congratulate him for bringing back that thing that belongs to nobody, to us. Somebody argued at that lecture, Professor Osita Ogu, that now even the primordial culture is gone. The guys who are holding the village association money are stealing it because that other culture has poisoned this. Because people don't think thoroughly about the common good, and 80% of the thinking of public officials in Nigeria is focused on how they can steal. They are not able to do the right things because they're looking for the loopholes to use to steal from the state. And that's different. Look, I was interviewed on another television show a few weeks ago, and the interviewer read off of the book by Lee Kuan Yew when he talked about visiting Nigeria, about how the average Nigerian civil servant, brilliant, 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 were focused more on whether they got a Mercedes-Benz as their official car, whereas his own ministers and permanent secretaries in Singapore were riding the bus to work and focusing on building those roads. The Nigerian ones couldn't build roads because they were focused on the size of their Mercedes. In the end, Singapore thrived, and with no resources at all, literally, within 30 years, could build some of the greatest standards of living in human history. And this is really what the point is, which is where I say the challenge that we have is a collapse of culture. If the values of those in public life could change, then the brilliance, the intelligence of all these smart Nigerians could go to work for the advance of the common good of all. But so long as we are the way we are, then we will continue to play the fiddle. I mean, just look at what they're doing in Egypt. And I ask Nigerians to go and look. They're building a new Cairo in the middle of the desert. 16-lane highways that are with far less resources than we have. You see leadership coming from the president of Egypt, Sisi, and you wonder, why can't our leaders be like this guy? Which permanent secretaries are running around in Egypt with Mercedes-Benzes? You won't see it. But here, unless you see a motorcade escorting some scoundrel who calls himself a National Assembly member or minister, you don't even begin, because they think that's where everything lies in this. I don't know what language to use to describe the kinds of behavior that we put up with public resources in a country where there's so much poverty. That is what the crisis really is.
Poverty, big question. Can poverty ever be reduced or removed? You had said earlier, much earlier, that unless there's somebody that has the values in leadership, before, that was my paraphrasing now, before we can begin to see any light at the end of the tunnel. What do you think is necessarily the solution to the problem of corruption?
Well, leadership example. You just have one leader that behaves the right way, shows example, and everybody will change.
What is the right way? What's the right way?
First of all, put the people first, not yourself. That's the first thing that leaders do. Second, find the smartest people to create this marketplace of ideas from which the best is crystallized and implemented as policy. Thirdly, ensure accountability of everybody. Consequence management is so important. But in Nigeria, there are no consequences. People get away with murder every day. In fact, I want to bet, I'm not joking about this, the prisons in Nigeria are full of honest people who have been jailed by criminals. The criminals
That's a serious one.
The criminals outside the prison sending honest people to jail in Nigeria. I can prove it. Real criminals don't go to prison in Nigeria. So we have a tragic situation of a collapse of our institutions. Judiciary is an unfortunate example of how things have gone wrong for us as a people. And God help us to reform it. If we don't, we're in trouble.
Well, that's a very thought-provoking, point that Professor Utomi just raised now. We'll take another short break, and we'll be right back to conclude properly. Welcome back. Soni Irabor live here, featuring Professor Pat Utomi, 70-year-old elder statesman, we now call him, and his heart bleeds for Nigeria. So does mine. And the question is, where is the way forward? Which is the way forward? What is the way forward? So many questions needing answers. Is there any hope, Professor?
There's plenty of hope, but first of all, we have to get the electoral process right. What we call elections in Nigeria is plain banditry, and they are losing the sense of shame in how they engage in that banditry. I mean, the recent mess in the Senate is conclusive of that fact. Unless the people are represented and that the people who lead actually truly reflect the pain of the people, we're not going to be able to get it right. But if we can get the electoral process right, if we can get the outcomes to reflect the will of the people, then you will see policy move in the direction that can be very transformative and happen very, very quickly. So it's like from scripture, when God said to the people of Israel, I put before you life and death. Choose life that you may live. The problem is the Nigerian people are not being allowed to choose life. Some criminal elements who call themselves politicians have been choosing death for the Nigerian people. That's the sad story of Nigeria. Once the people overcome and overwhelm these elements, life will truly flow in Nigeria.
Based on what you just said, I'm forced to ask you when that Uhuru will come, or what's that called? Is that Eureka, or whatever they call it? When will it come? Maybe never. Why do we have...
The answer is not in the wind. The answer is in all of us.
It's in all of us.
When we determine that it's time to stop the nonsense, it will stop.
But why do we have a situation where you have agencies that are meant to fight corruption to a standstill? The same agencies are allowing corruption to thrive. What is wrong?
Because you send to those agencies people whose goal is to corruptly enrich themselves. Look, one governor, I will not mention his name, but he is well known in this country, several years ago was talking in his cabinet. And there was a project that was obviously a clear scam. And one of his commissioners said to him, Excellency, softly, I beg you. And he said, my friend, you too fear yourself. What's wrong with the matter? All you have to do is keep 500 million for EFCC, keep 500 million for the judiciary. Once they give you bail, the rest of it is stories. You tell that story until they give up and go. And so all the political actors, civil servants, and who rape the Nigerian treasury have to do is keep 500 million for EFCC, 500 million for the judiciary. Maybe the price has increased now because this was more than 10 years ago. But sadly, this is what has kept Nigeria down. And the evil of corruption. And the private sector doesn't help matters. I mean, I've told you stories several times of how Benga Chesson came years ago. Not Benga Chesson, the CBI, Convention on Business Integrity, came with Sheikh Apampa, Soji Apampa, and the Bishop Ekun to make a presentation at the Chamber of Commerce, where the leading private sector practitioners, I was in that chamber because I was a leading executive of a multinational company. And they made a presentation in which Nigerians were supposed to, of that caliber, were supposed to come. This was Lagos Chamber of Commerce council meeting. To say publicly, I will not give and I will not take. Of more than 60 of us, probably controlling up to 60% of the private sector GDP in Nigeria at that time, were in that room, and only 3 were willing to say publicly, I will not give a bribe, I will not take a bribe. Those 3 were managing director of Cadbury Nigeria at the time, Dr. Christopher Kolade.
May so rest in peace.
Man, and a leading surveyor who so we pray to rest in peace, called Kukoyi. The third person was myself.
Wow, that's serious.
The private sector. The private sector is a major part of the problem.
Wow. Okay, so as we round off, we have less than a minute to go to round off. I want to ask you specifically, as an elder statesman again, you said you have hope for Nigeria. I too have hope for Nigeria. I think we all do have hope for Nigeria. But who's willing to bear the cat? That's the real question. So when you look at the executive, the National Assembly, the judiciary, and maybe the rest of us, maybe corporate world, where will you or who will you advise specifically on the way to go for things to get better?
Everybody. Nigeria belongs to all of us. We all have a duty, an obligation, and the need to think more clearly and to know that all this selfish, oh, if I grab as much as I can, my children will be okay, it's nonsense. You know, look at somebody, I will not mention names, who was in a ministry awarding road contracts. They were painting the roads. And then he was going to his hometown after he left being a minister. And one of those roads got him. He had an accident. And there were no hospitals that he could be taken to that could really do much for him. But because he had a lot of money, an air ambulance was ordered from London. The thing flew 6 hours to Nigeria. By the time they got him into the plane, he was gone.
Wow.
People should think of their own self-interest. Sonny, this is not a secret. You know, most of your friends, I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. But these things happen to us every day in Nigeria.
On that note,
we still don't know.
On that very sad note, I want to wish you happy birthday, by the way, and also to tell Nigeria there's still hope for Nigeria. I don't know how else to look at it, except that one day be one day, monkey go market, go forget to return to Nigeria. I didn't say home, I just said to Nigeria. Thank you all very much, Professor. Thank you so much. And for you at home, thank you again. And the news comes out very shortly. Soni Irabor Live is signing off. Bye-bye now.